Not as you would see them today. He was a fine painter, but Etty was a painter of news, and that was deemed risque, so his pictures went to the left. Thus, Etty was quite influential and got a group together which saved the wall from being demolished. This group became known as the York Footpaths Association, which still exists today. The city walls were the defence of the city and take about 2 hours to walk around. If you fancy a shorter walk, the bit we recommend is just across the road on our right. It stretches from Withso to Monkbar and takes about 10 minutes to walk. From there you will get fantastic views of York Minster, and it is one of the sections with railings, so you can't fall off. It's always nice to walk from Britain. It is thought that the settlement around this area had declined so much by the end of the Roman period that it was unlikely to have been a significant post-Roman regional centre. The withdrawal of the Roman legions from York around 410 AD left the city at the mercy of the Anglo-Saxons. The Saxons seem to have settled into Roman York without changing the city too much. As we move across the junction into Gillygate, originally called St Giles Gate, on the right-hand side of the bus, just above the shop windows, you will see a black lamp on the wall. Look behind the lamp, and you can see a small white cat. You'll see lots of these cats all over the city's buildings. Originally put there as good luck charms in Victorian times, later they became a trademark of a local architect called Tom Adams. These cats have become a feature all over the city. Some of the buildings have bricked-up windows on the first floor. This comes from the Georgian window tax. In 1696, a law was passed on which owners were taxed on the amount of windows their property had. To avoid paying this tax, windows were bricked up. These days, when something is expensive, you'll hear people say, "That's daylight robbery." It is possible this saying comes from the old tax. You either paid up or lost your daylight, hence daylight robbery. In Lord Mayor's Walk, look to the right and we will get a nice view along the city walls. You can still see the defensive moat at the foot of the walls. This once would have been full of filthy water and rotting waste. Or to give it its proper title, the Cathedral and Metropolitical Church of St Peter in York. It is both a minster and a cathedral. The name minster derives from the Latin monasterium. From here, the local monks would go out to teach or minister. It is also a cathedral because it contains the throne of a bishop. This is taken from the Latin cathedra and means seat. In York's case, the seat of an archbishop. On your right, and as we turn, you will see Monkbar, which is the tallest of York's gateways, standing at 63 feet, or 19.2 metres in height. On the top stand life-size stone figures known as the Wild Men of York. Legend says they will come alive and throw their boulders down onto anybody daring enough to attack the city. To follow the road ahead of us across the roundabout for about 10 miles, we would come to Castle Howard, its name from the Latin word fossa, which means ditch or stream. There is no longer any commercial river traffic on the foss, which was made into a canal in 1792. Today, both the Ouse and the foss are mainly used by pleasure boats and wildlife. Looking to the right is Sainsbury's supermarket. In the 1980s, when this was being built, workmen unearthed hundreds of skeletons here. Work was stopped, and an investigation found this site to be the largest Jewish burial site outside of London, dating back to 1177. The chief rabbi was called in, the land was consecrated and declared sacred, and the bodies were left in peace. This area is known as Dewberry, which means Jewish borough or town. Please alight here for any of these places. The Merchant Adventurers Hall, which unfortunately we do not pass on our tour, can be found by alighting here and turning left into Fossgate just ahead, and then you will find the entrance about 1 minute's walk on the right. Built between 1357 and 1361, the Merchant Adventurers Hall is probably the finest medieval guild hall in Europe, and is said to be one of Prince Charles's favourite buildings. Please see your red leaflet for information about any current special offers on admissions. Looking ahead, we can see the small church hall of St Crux. Just in front of St Crux on the right is York's shortest street with the longest name, Withso Gate. We think it gets its name from a corruption of an old Saxon saying, Witna, meaning it's neither one thing nor the other. The street only has 3 properties, numbers 1, 1A, and 1.5. It never gets to 2.
Yeah. Mga tao nakaharang.
On the right is Stonebow House, a typical 1960s building in the style known as brutalism, which was often functional but horrible in appearance. We show you this because, believe it or not, Stonebow House was once voted the 2nd ugliest building in Britain. It was only beaten by the Tricorn Centre in Portsmouth. However, Portsmouth knocked their building down. In recent times, Stonebow House has undergone a massive upgrade to improve its looks. What do you think of it now? Just past the church hall of St Crux on the right is the Shambles, York's most photographed street. The Shambles probably gets its name from an old Danish word, fleshamels, which means the street of the butchers. The flesh was the meat, and the shamel was a large window ledge outside the shop where meat would be displayed. The Merchant Adventurers Hall, which unfortunately we do not pass on our tour, can be found by alighting here and turning left into Fossgate just ahead, and then you will find the entrance about 1 minute's walk on the right. Built between 1357 and 1361, the Merchant Adventurers Hall is probably the finest medieval guild hall in Europe, and is said to be one of Prince Charles's favourite buildings. Please see your red leaflet for information about any current special offers on admissions.
No. I said. Oh, I'm not doing it again. No.
To the right, and you may get a brief view along the shambles. At the far end, you can see how the houses nearly touch at the top. It is said that 2 men can lean out of the windows and shake hands across the street. If you heard the shout, "Gardez-vous," you would very quickly get under the overhang of the buildings, as "Gardez-vous" means "watch out for the water," and meant that the contents of somebody's chamber pot was about to be deposited on your head. We move into Coppergate. It doesn't get its name from the metal copper as you might think, but from cupra, the Norse word for cup maker. It was when the new Coppergate shopping precinct was being built in the late 1970s and early 1980s that over 40,000 finds from a Viking settlement were unearthed, preserved by the silt and mud. What was found here was so important that it even changed the way we teach about Vikings in the national school curriculum. Today you can see what was found in the York Viking Centre, where you can travel back in time over 1,000 years in York's history to experience the sights, the sounds and even the smells of Viking York. You can visit the Viking Centre from our next stop, but please remain seated until we arrive at the Clifford's Tower stop. At the end of Coppergate, on the left, is Castlegate, the original street to the castle. In Castlegate you will find the Church of St Mary's, which has the tallest spire in York, and Fairfax House, which is a beautifully renovated Georgian house, built between 1740 and 1745. The York Viking Centre, York Dungeon, Fairfax House and St George's Field Coach and Car Park. Courts. These days it is the Crown Court. As we pass by, you can see the bars on the cell windows. Those on trial here are still held in the same cells the offenders were held in over 200 years ago. This is due to the unlisted property, so it cannot be altered inside or out. On the left, you can see the last remaining section of the castle wall. Look left as we pass the circular drum tower, and you can see where the drawbridge would have been at the base of the wall. Ahead, we can see a square tower marking the end of this section of the city wall. This is Fishergate Postern Tower, which stands where the wall met the River Foss, which would have been much wider than it is today. There were 6 postern towers on the walls of York. Postern means rear entrance, and this is the only such tower still remaining. As we turn into Lead Mills Lane, look to the right. On the wall of the tower, just above head height, is a stone projection sticking out. This projection is part of a garderobe, which is a medieval toilet chute. The waste would come out of the chute and drop directly into the King's Fish Pool down below. Over the hedge to our left is the graveyard of St George's Church, which has just one upstanding headstone in it. Those on the bottom deck may see this headstone through the gates on the left as we turn. This is the grave of Dick Turpin, the notorious Georgian highwayman, who robbed stagecoaches in the 18th century. Dick Turpin was buried in the graveyard of the original St George's Church in 1739. Since his death, Turpin has become a romantic figure in English history, but the truth is far from the legend. The legend tells of a man who rode a horse called Black Bess. He would jump out from behind trees in front of stagecoaches shouting, "Stand and deliver, your money or your life." It was at this point you would give him all your money, and everybody would go home happy. In truth, he was believed to be a thief, a poacher, a burglar, and a murderer, not a nice man. And he never had a horse called Black Bess. That was made up about 100 years after his death, in a novel called Rookwood, by the Victorian novelist Harrison Ainsworth. Turpin was actually from Essex, but came to York to avoid capture using the assumed name of John Palmer. He laid low at a place just to the east of York, but one day the landlord's cockerel was keeping him awake, so Turpin shot it dead. It wasn't the cleverest thing to do, as it got him arrested. He was brought to York for trial, where he was found guilty of the more serious crime of being a horse thief. He was taken out to the Tyburn on the Knaves Mire, where he was hanged in 1739. We move into Warmgate. This street was originally called Walbergate, possibly named after a female Viking warrior named Walber. It is one of York's oldest streets, following the line of the ancient Roman road to the east. Straight ahead of us is Warmgate Bar, the most complete gateway on a city wall, not only here in York, but also in the United Kingdom. This is because it still retains its barbican, which is the tunnel-like structure on the outside of the gateway. We will see the barbican when we turn right. You will not see another original barbican attached to a city wall unless you go to Krakow in Poland. All the others have now gone. On the side of Warmgate Bar, we can see an Elizabethan gatekeeper's house, which stands on 2 stone pillars, one either side of the central archway. We don't know where the pillars are from, but we do know they are of Roman origin. The gateway would have had only one central arch, the others on the left and right are modern. The gate still has its original 15th century oak doors. The barbican is an extra defensive structure on the outside of the gate. It is a double gateway formed by 2 walls, which stretch out into the road ahead for about 18 metres or 60 feet. The purpose of the barbican was to slow down or trap any attackers in the tunnel between the inner oak doors and the outer doors, which were made of iron. As we turn right, look to the right, and you will have a brief view inside the barbican. Imagine being trapped in there, with the soldiers throwing all kinds of nasty things down from above. flat grassed areas at the foot of the walls were where livestock were kept in pens awaiting their sale. In 1971, the market was moved again, this time to Merton, a village just outside of York, and was renamed the York Livestock Centre. On our right is Fishergate Bar. This is the smallest of the 5 medieval gateways, first recorded in 1315. The red painted stone above the archway reveals the date of the current bar, which is 1487. 2 years after that date, the gateway was attacked and damaged in the Yorkshire Peasants' Revolt against Henry VII. The rebels burned the gates of the bar after murdering the Earl of Northumberland. The gateway was bricked up soon after and wasn't reopened until 1834 to give better access to the cattle market. Fishergate is the road to Fulford, a village just south of York. This was the site of the Battle of Fulford on the 20th of September 1066, where the Vikings beat the Saxons. The Saxon army then returned the favour at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, just 5 days later. Just 3 weeks later, however, there was a third, more famous battle, the Battle of Hastings, where the Saxons, led by Harold Godwinson, were defeated by the Normans, led by William the Conqueror. Ahead we can see the Travel Lodge, which is a modern building, but you can see how the architect has tried to get the building to fit in with old York. He's put a turret shape on it and covered the walls in magnesium limestone, the same stone the minster and the city walls are made of. The idea is that eventually it will blend in with its older surroundings. Look to the left, and you can see in the distance a glass structure above the River Foss. This is York's flood barrier. A barrier is lowered from this structure to stop the River Ouse backing up the River Foss, and this stops the eastern side of the city from flooding, unless it fails, as it did in such spectacular fashion on Boxing Day 2015. On the left is St George's Field, a piece of land which stands between the 2 rivers. This used to be the site of the ducking stool, where you could be ducked for such misdemeanours as being a witch, brewing bad beer, or being a nagging wife.
Never.
We move on to Skeldergate Bridge and cross the River Ouse, York's main river. Look to your right to see Ouse Bridge, the oldest of the bridges built in 1821, replacing various older bridges dating back to Viking times. Look to your right, and you will see the city walls at Bale Hill, a grass mound with trees growing on it. Bale Hill was the site of William the Conqueror's second castle, dating to around 1068. Nothing remains of it, however, because it was only ever made of wood, and nobody wanted to pay for its upkeep. Eventually, it was found to be in such a sad state of repair, it was pulled down. On our left is an area known as Clementhorpe, named after the Norman church and nunnery of St Clement. Bishopthorpe Road ahead will take you to the village of Bishopthorpe, which is where you'll find Bishopthorpe Palace, home to the Archbishop of York. Also along Bishopthorpe Road, before the village of Bishopthorpe, you will find access to York Racecourse on the area known as the Knavesmire. Bishopthorpe Road has been named in the Times as one of the top 30 of the coolest places to live in the country. In 2014, the Tour de France passed through this area on its way into York. A great street party was held here, and some of the local pubs even changed their names. The Slip Inn became La Slip, and the Swan became La Swan. As we set off through the lights, look left and keep looking left for a brief chance to see the smallest house in York. Watch out for the house at the top of the hill with a large black door with number 76 on it.
Yan.
Just after it, look in the gap and there is a door with the number 76A on it. This claims to be the smallest house in York.
Bakit? Hindi ko gets. Bakit smallest house?
Notice the buildings around become much more modern outside the walls. Don't be fooled. There used to be older buildings outside the city walls, but in 1644, York was under siege for 3 months during the Civil War. Around 30,000 parliamentarian troops surrounded the city. However, it is said it was the royalists defending the city who pulled down the buildings outside the walls to get a better view of those attacking them. We are now in an area of Victorian and Edwardian York. With the arrival of the railways to York in the 1800s, the city grew rapidly. More houses were needed to accommodate the growing population, which had shot up from 17,000 in 1801 to a staggering 77,000 by 1881. These new suburbs were built outside the city walls, with back-to-back terraces to house the people who had come to York to work on the railways and in the chocolate factories. Once the railways had arrived, York became much easier to get to and quickly became quite a tourist destination for the middle classes. No longer did you have to make the long and dangerous journey down south for entertainment by horse-drawn carriage, and so York soon became the leisure and pleasure capital of the north. Chocolate making took off in York mainly with the coming of the railways, although chocolate has been made in York since 1700. The two main chocolate makers in York were Terry's, who started making chocolate in 1767, and later Rowntree's, who had opened a grocer's shop in the centre of York in 1822. Road, we pass a modern housing estate known as the Chocolate Works, which gives a clue to what was in this area. Behind the buildings on the left, we can see a brief sight of what remains of the Terry's chocolate factory. Sadly, Terry's no longer makes chocolate here in York. The factory was closed down in 2005 and production was moved elsewhere. Its most famous product, the chocolate orange, is now made in Europe. The chocolate orange has become very much a part of Christmas tradition in this country. A survey has revealed that a Terry's chocolate orange finds its way into 1 in 10 Christmas stockings. Terry's was thought to be the first chocolate manufacturer of an assorted box of chocolates, which of course became known as Terry's All Gold. If you look through the trees on the left at the clock tower, can you spot what's strange about it? It has no numbers on the clock face, just the letters spelling the words Terry York, a reminder of over 200 years of chocolate making in this city. Allowed to use this area for leisure and for grazing animals, and Mire, a boggy area of land, which it still is to this day. The Knavesmire wasn't just used for horse racing, but other entertainments also took place here. It was common to see bare-knuckle boxing, bear baiting, and cockfights here. The most popular spectator sport, however, were the hangings, which took place here from 1379 right up until 1801. People would come from far and wide to see villains hang at the Tyburn. The most notorious person to be hanged at the Tyburn was none other than Dick Turpin, a highway robber who was executed here on the 7th of April, 1739. Today, the Knavesmire holds around 15 days of horse racing a year, the highlight of which is the Ebor Festival that takes place in August. York Racecourse also had the honour of hosting Royal Ascot in 2005, whilst the Ascot course was being renovated. In 1982, when the late Pope John Paul II visited the United Kingdom, it was the first time a reigning pope had visited this country. He came to the racecourse here in York and gave mass to over 200,000 people. The Knavesmire is also used for music concerts, circuses, fairs, and has been the home to the largest beer festival in the north of England on many occasions. On the right, in the middle of the road, is the herdsman's cottage, which looks like something out of the Hansel and Gretel fairy tale. The cottage is where the man who looked after the animals on the Knavesmire would have lived from 1840. Traditionally, if you own the property, you are given the title Keeper of the Strain, although there are no herds of animals grazing on the Knavesmire anymore. Towards the city, we travel up an area of York known as the Mount, possibly due to it being the highest land in the city. The Mount was always one of the more favoured areas to live, even in Roman times. The large buildings around this area date mainly from the Georgian and Victorian periods, and these were once private residences containing many servants. Today, most of the buildings have become hotels, guest houses, and apartments. Follows the line of the old Roman road into the city from the south, which lies to the left of the modern road, just a few feet underground. Romans used to bury their dead alongside main roads, outside their settlements, possibly because they thought the dead would like to hear the sounds of the living going on with their daily lives. There are hundreds of such burials in this area. In 2004, the remains of around 80 people were discovered during building work around the area, in the garden of a former 18th century mansion. The skeletons are probably those of professional fighters who fought and died for the entertainment of the ruling Romans. Almost all the corpses are of robust young males, many of whom met their death by decapitation between the late 1st and 4th centuries AD. Archaeologists initially suspected that the skeletons were those of Roman soldiers who were loyal to the Emperor Severus. He died at York in 211 AD, and his ruthless son, Caracalla, might have had the soldiers killed if they had tried to stop him from seizing power. In 2014, researchers from the York Archaeological Trust, who were leading the investigation, announced tantalizing evidence that the men were possibly gladiators brought to Britain from across the Mediterranean. They would have fought in an amphitheatre, which is yet to be found. seen Micklegate Bar. This is one of the 4 main gateways into the city of York. Micklegate's name comes from Mickleth, meaning Great Street, and it is said to be the front door to York. It is also known as the Royal Entrance, as it is the custom for every monarch who visits York to ask permission of the Lord Mayor to be allowed into the city through this gateway. Every monarch has done this except for 2, Henry VIII, who on his second visit didn't go through the ceremony allowing him into the city, and Queen Victoria. Queen Elizabeth II visited Micklegate Bar during part of her Diamond Jubilee celebrations in 2012 and asked the Lord Mayor for permission to enter. The Lord Mayor, of course, is never going to say, "Not today, Mom, you can't come in." This is because Micklegate Bar was also known as Traitors' Gate, where the heads of traitors would be chopped off, boiled, rolled in tar and stuck on a spike on the top, as a warning to those coming into the city. We are now moving into Queen Street. Ahead of us is York's modern railway station, opened in 1877, when it claimed to be the largest railway station in the world. It is no longer the largest, but is still an amazing piece of architecture, having been built on a long curve. The first permanent station was built down to our right inside the walls. The large arches were knocked through the walls to allow the trains into the station in 1841. The trains would go through the arches and then have to sweep left to the old station inside the walls. It wasn't very practical, as once you got the train in there, it then had to be turned around to get back out, and this proved to be problematic. It would have been fine if it was only 1 or 2 trains a day, but York was becoming a very busy station, which soon saw over 300 trains a day coming to York. The new station was built to alleviate this problem in 1877.
Medyo gitna mo. Usog ko sa kanan. Yung, nadali mo. Yun nga. Ang mga nakapalibot, yun ang lalakarin natin mamaya. Pero doon tayo sa kabilang side. Yeah.
Welcome to anybody joining us here at the railway station on the York City Sightseeing Tour. The tour will take approximately 1 hour, during which we will be pointing out places of interest and telling you something of the history of our beautiful city. Your ticket is valid for 24 hours from the time of purchase. Note that this does not mean we run all through the night, but you will find the last full tour times of the day in your red leaflet, or ask your driver. Your ticket allows you to get on and off at any of our designated city sightseeing bus stops along the route throughout the day. Please ring the bell in good time if you wish to alight at any of our stops. Also remember to keep your ticket safe, as you will need to present it to the driver whenever you board one of our buses. The time printed on the ticket is the expiry time, and you must rejoin the tour before then. Also, your ticket will get you a discount off the fare at any participating city sightseeing tour in the world, and other local attractions in York. Please see your leaflet for current offers. For safety, please remain seated when the bus is moving. Please relax and enjoy the tour. The hotel to our left was opened on the 20th of May 1878. In those days, it was simply known as the Royal Station Hotel. In recent years, the hotel has changed hands and names, but locals have always called it the Royal York. However, as far as we are aware, none of our monarchs have ever stayed here, so it doesn't really deserve its royal title. Both the Royal York and the railway station are built out of Scarborough brick, which is yellow in colour. This probably wouldn't be allowed these days, as anything built facing onto the city walls should be made of magnesium limestone to fit in. The hotel is the largest in York, and when we go further along, we can get a truer picture of its size. 85 people buried in the mass grave outside the walls, and very few headstones still remain, although only people with money would have had the dignity of a headstone. Cholera broke out at a place called Hagworm's Nest, a nasty-sounding place for a nasty disease. The church cemeteries were filling up quickly, and the churches didn't really want the bodies in their graveyards for fear of the disease spreading, so a new pit was dug outside the city walls. Unfortunately, they didn't understand cholera in 1832, and putting the bodies outside the walls didn't stop the disease spreading, as cholera is not an airborne disease that is spread by sewage and dirty water. To our left are the memorial gardens. These are gardens dedicated to those who lost their lives in the First and Second World Wars. This is our nearest stop for the National Railway Museum. If you take a trip around the National Railway Museum, you will find something there for everyone, not just the rail enthusiast. Do allow plenty of time for your visit there, as the museum is huge. It is also every Yorkshire man's favourite price to enter. Free.
Yes.
Looking through the trees ahead, we can see the true scale and stature of the former Royal York Hotel. As we said, it used to be called the Royal York, but shouldn't have been, as none of the royal family have ever stayed in it. Looking ahead, you will see the city walls. If you look through the arch, you will see a cream-coloured building. This is the original station hotel. This is where, on one visit, Queen Victoria stopped off when travelling to Balmoral by train in 1854. She was with Prince Albert and her children, and they took lunch in the station hotel. There is a tale that when Victoria was given the bill for lunch, she was so incensed that she vowed never to come to York again. I'm not sure what was said, but I'm guessing one was not amused. Through a modern arch put in the city walls to allow for easier traffic flow in 1876, and move onto Lendal Bridge, which was opened in 1861, but it collapsed and wasn't reopened until 1863. It crosses the River Ouse, York's main river, which takes its name from the Celtic or pre-Celtic Withso, and probably means simply water or slow-flowing river. On the left is Lendal Tower. It dates back to the reign of Richard I and has stood next to the River Ouse since 1299. It was part of the city's defences. In 1677, the tower was leased to the York Waterworks Company for the princely sum of £1 peppercorn a year for 500 years. In 2010, the tower was sold and is now a private home. Ahead of us is York Minster, the jewel in York's crown and the largest Gothic cathedral in modern Europe. This present building took 252 years to complete. It was started in 1220 and not finished off until 1472. We say it's complete, but in actual fact the central tower should have a spire, about another 32 metres or 100 feet in height on the top. But the weight of the spire would have collapsed the central tower, so it was never built. The Minster has 128 stained glass windows containing over 3 million pieces of glass.
Malapit na tayo bumaba. Malapit na tayo. How's your sleeping beauty?
Nakaka-record ba yun? Kaya nakasakyan?
Hindi.
Kasi gumagalaw, hindi na-record.
Bagay. Ayun na, bababa na tayo kasi kaya please. Okay lang?
stained glass in the country. A lot of it is in York Minster. The reason for this comes from the siege of York in 1644. When it surrendered, the Royalist army was allowed to march out of the city, still holding their weapons and with standards raised. The parliamentarian soldiers who took over the city were ordered not to destroy the city as they would normally. This is because the man in charge of the parliamentarian soldiers was Sir Thomas Fairfax, and he was from around these parts, so didn't want to see the city destroyed. This brings us into Exhibition Square. This is the nearest stop for York Minster, the Art Gallery, King's Manor, Lutham Bar, and the nicest section of the city wall, as well as the Visit York Information Centre. Thank you to anyone leaving us at this point. We hope that you have enjoyed your tour with York City Sightseeing. We hope you will join us again, here or at any of our other destinations worldwide. If time and traffic permits, we may pause here for a few minutes. If we do, this bus will be leaving shortly. The tour will take approximately 1 hour, during which we will be pointing out places of interest and telling you something of the history of our beautiful city. Your ticket is valid for 24 hours from the time of purchase.